How does a Christian worldview align with the science of evolution?
Okay, great
Oh,
question. How does the Christian worldview align with the science of evolution? I think I need to start this question by saying Christians disagree on the question of evolution. Legitimate, godly, biblical Christians disagree. People on our church staff team disagree. People on our elder team disagree about this, and there are multiple views that you can have that would be legitimate biblical views for this. And I'm respectful of all the people who have all the different kinds of evolutionary views, but I do have my view, and I do have the microphone, so I get to talk a little bit more than the other people. One of the views is, so view A is that God created, well, let me say this first. Here's a place that we all agree with one another. Evolution has a couple of ways of thinking about it. There's evolution as a philosophy and evolution as a process. So evolution as a process essentially says that God used time to be able to change animals and plants and other beings over a long period of time. Evolution as a process is potentially biblical. That's something that God could have done. It's within his power, it's within his scope, it's within a biblical framework. Evolution as a philosophy says there was no God who was behind evolution. So it says it's just random processes and natural selection that made this happen. In essence, that beings aren't created, they're just slime that got lucky. Now, this is against what the Bible has to say. You can't say that evolution happened without God. But there's three different ways that Christians think about how evolution happened that could be all plausible. View number one is generally people who are young earth creationists. And they say when God created everything 6,000 to 10,000 years ago, God created all of the animals and all of the biodiversity, and it never became more diverse over time. Species may have died off, but no species have come into existence since the day of creation. Now, is it within God's power to create every species at the same moment with a snap of his fingers? Absolutely. God could have done it that way. So view number two is a view that God created the universe a long, long time ago, 13.7 or 9 billion years ago, the earth 4.7 billion years ago, and that God has used processes over time to be able to create human beings and animals and plants and everything that's out there, but that he has interjected himself at certain points in the equation in order to be able to make that possible. So animals and human beings and everything have developed and changed over time. It would be an evolutionary view that would be pro-evolution as a process, but with God's power that's behind it all. Now, this is a sensible process both for the Bible and for science. In the scientific arena, when you take a look at the fossil record, you'll see something that scientists call punctuated equilibrium. What that means is, as you look through the fossil record, it looks like there are long periods of stasis and then massive change. Long periods of stasis and then massive change. Long periods of stasis and then massive change. Typical evolutionary theory says everything changes slowly over time. You guys ever heard that before? Like it just little teeny steps all the time. The fossil record doesn't indicate that. The fossil record indicates it all stays the same and then bang, it all changes. Well, the second view says God's the reason behind that change. And that there are certain times where he intervenes supernaturally in order to create new species or grow eyes or grow organs or change things dramatically within a species. From a scientific perspective, we have oodles of evidence that microevolution happened. Like you guys see the peppered moth experiment when you were in high school, you know that one? Peppered moth experiment was done in the Industrial Revolution, and there are these black and white peppered moths, and they would be on white branches of trees, and they would tend to be white because if they were black, they got eaten. Industrial Revolution happened, smoke got all over the trees, branches turned black, and what do you know? The ones that were blacker were the ones that survived, the ones that were white got eaten. Well, this is an example of microevolution, that within a species, without the species actually changing, certain characteristics become dominant based on your environment. Microevolution is just a fact. It's just very hard to argue with. But what we don't have scientific evidence for is macroevolution, like I didn't have a liver, but now I do. I wasn't able to see, but now I can see. Those evolutionary pieces we've just never observed, and we can't see them happening. What we see from the fossil record is that things stay the same, stay the same, stay the same. Boom, they change dramatically. What makes sense to me from a theological perspective is that God intervened in those moments, and he was able to take creation to a brand new level. He's done it over a long, long time. Third view that is in this, and I'm in the second view, just so you guys know, that's my view. The third view is another evolutionary view that says, from the beginning of time, God created everything with all of the processes, all of the tools, all of the pieces and thoughts and ideas about DNA and how things would change. He put it all in play, and then he's allowing that to play out. And the genius of God happened at the moment of creation 13.7 billion years ago, much like a young earther would say the genius of God happened 10,000 years ago, only it's a longer time frame with more time for stuff to play out. It played out naturally, but God supernaturally put all the pieces in place so that those kinds of things would move towards order. I don't hold this position, but one of my good friends, Perry Marshall, wrote a book called Evolution 2.0 that espouses this view, and it's a really helpful, brilliant book that's from this perspective, and I would commend a good read of that book. Now, while we're on this subject, I'm just going to do a quick excursus on Genesis 1 through 11. I talked about this in our Origins series, but some people say we can confidently date the earth by looking at Genesis chapter 1 through 11. Particularly the folks who are in the young earth camp say 6,000 to 10,000 years. You just add up all of the genealogies, and you go back 2,000 years to Abraham. You trace it back, you'll get 6,000 to 10,000 years old. The planet is. But I think it is a classic mistake of Bible study to try and ask questions of the Bible that the text is not trying to answer. Here's what I mean by this. In Genesis chapter 1 through 11, it is a worldview document about origins. It's about God. It's about theology. It's about anthropology. It's about why are things the way they are? Where did we come from? But it is not a scientific textbook. So oftentimes we ask of the Bible, can you be a scientific textbook for me? Because now, 3,000 years after that book was written, I'm asking different questions. Can you please answer the questions I'm asking now, 3,000 years later and 3,000 miles from there, that 99% of humanity has never asked, but I'm asking them now, can you answer those questions? And the answer is, that's not what Moses or God ever intended for Genesis chapter 1 through 11 to answer. So when we're asking questions, scientific questions, what's the age of the earth? How did evolution take place? Genesis 1 through 11 was never intended to answer that. It was intended to answer who started it all? God. When was it started? In the beginning. Is history linear or cyclical? It's linear because there was a beginning and things move forward. What was behind the order of everything? God was. What's the nature of a human being? We're here to co-rule with God over creation, etc. Those questions are answered because those are the questions that Moses' audience was asking. So, long answer to the evolutionary question, but three different views that Christians legitimately have. I would be in the middle one. I think biblically you can justify all three. Scientifically, the middle one makes the most sense to me.